themes associated with this season. And the more you understand those themes as maybe associated with a season,
Mm-hmm.
then you start to sort of give yourself a vocabulary to understand your inner seasons.
Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Evergreen RX. I'm your host, Hayden, licensed mental health therapist, Cancer Moon, and the first to get deep at any party. And I'm so excited to welcome today's guest onto the pod. We are joined by Alison Krywucki. Did I say that
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Okay.
Wiki. Mm-hmm.
Allison is an amazing yoga teacher who creates total vibes in her YouTube classroom. She aligns yoga with the moon, the seasons, astrology, and I was so lucky to have found Allison's work when I was looking exactly for the kinds of videos that she creates. I was really getting into yoga, really getting into learning about astrology and the seasons, and I wanted something that reflected that, something that was like tailored to those differences and the unique vibe that each of those seasons brings. And so she also incorporates poetry and imagery and creative poses into her work, which we'll be talking more about today, kind of how that can affect your own practice in your own life, and really discussing the power of a seasonal practice, deep diving the vibe and the influence of each season on the wheel of the year, talking a little bit hopefully about the impact of like full moons versus new moons and things like that, and to learn more about the transformational effect of syncing our bodies with the earth and with those rhythms and changes. So I'm so excited to have Alison here. Thank you so much for joining.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So I first want to start someplace a little bit different and talk about the influence of poetry on your understanding of seasonal rhythms.
What a beautiful question. Regarding poetry, it's funny because my interest in poetry and my study of poetry was something that I did in college. So for me, it's funny that it's almost reflective of this season of my life that has occurred in the past, and it's kind of continued to be relevant, is now more relevant again.
Mm,
And incorporating poetry specifically, and I will read passages from different books that I find to be poetic in nature, like Robin Wall Kimmerer. If you ever read Braiding Sweetgrass, I mean, that's
mm,
prose, but really is so artfully presented that it's more, I don't know, it feels more like a poetic expression. And people like Mark Nepo, again, who feel like he really hits emotional chords that I feel like poetry does as well, you know?
mm-hmm.
So for me, adding in the element of poetry, it speaks to that really human quality that we're looking for in our practice, like connecting with our true selves and
Mm,
connecting with these deeper nature and aspects of ourselves. And poetry is sort of famously that type of expression that is a really successful poem is one that's really honest and one that really like speaks to you or like brings something out of you. It's like a true
mm,
art form. So that's sort of why I started to layer them in, because they become these thought-provoking little meditations that I didn't want to just have meditations at the end or like questions. I don't
yeah.
know. I just felt like this was more me, or an art form that speaks to me. So
Yeah.
weaving them in or finding poems that sort of have a bit of a seasonal relevance to them is kind of just like a fun creative challenge for me, and does seem to resonate with folks. So I appreciate that that's
Yeah.
happening. Also, just like more art and literature in our lives. I feel like those are really enriching things. So
Yeah.
that's the long answer to your
I,
question.
I love what you're saying though about kind of it's almost its own meditation, because I think I've tried to get into poetry in the past. I really love the idea of it, and I think some of the reason why I've had a hard time is because I don't take enough time with the poems that I read. I'm not like
Hmm.
sitting and kind of like contemplating or like letting them like sink in and see what comes out inside of me. And I think you're so right. It's like the reason why we all love like songwriting and music is that, a good song is really honest and they can be really specific too. You can listen to lyrics that are very specific to a person's experience, but there's something about it that is so universal. And I think that, the way that maybe the instrumentation in a song conveys that message
Hmm.
is the same kind of core that is probably within poetry and literature and things. So it's the way the rhythm to it, the way that it's written, the words that are chosen, and hearing that I feel like spoken is really powerful, which is cool in your videos too, that you like read it out and like, I can be laying there and kind of listening. But I just love what you said about using it as a way to like deepen our practice in coming more into kind of communication or connection with ourself and seeing what that brings up and getting to know ourself better through that
Yeah.
modality.
And I think relating it to songwriting is really key because that's when like the magic of art becomes that's what makes art magical. And
Mm,
that's why we're having this like AI crisis, right?
hmm.
Like the magic of art is when there's um, a moment of like such deep relatability, like somebody expresses something or maybe that hits you or describes a feeling that maybe you haven't been able to articulate or yeah, just sort of like hits a right, like strikes a chord with you, and then you realize in some situations, especially if you go to concerts or like have live music experiences, or oh, all these other people are having this
Hmm.
similar experience. So it's not only like individually affirming, but it's also very like unifying at the same time because you may realize
Yeah.
like you aren't the only one having this experience, or you're just with other people that are feeling very resonant with something that resonates with you in different ways. So it's sort of just this amazing human thing that like celebrates your individualism but also celebrates our collectivism. And that's I feel like that really resonates with my channel, and that like yoga is a very personal practice. We come to yoga and other practices for very personal reasons, but then there's always this like community element that makes it so much more
Yeah.
healing. And even if that community isn't, especially in yoga and all these other things, that community is maybe not all there for the same reason.
Hmm.
And I just find that to be really cool. Like you go to yoga class, different genders, different races, different backgrounds, different ages. So that's sort of I think that's why I think it really does link
Mm.
nicely with the yoga because the intention I have for my classes is very much that, you know.
Yeah. I love that. And something else that you do kind of because I feel like there's so much symbolism in I think why we connect to seasonal practices, why we connect to astrology or poetry or other things is there's so much symbolism of kind of like what's happening in like our deep inner world. And one of the things that you do that I haven't seen so much is kind of making unique moves and using names and that like embody the theme of whatever the practice is. And I wonder how you find like symbolic movement also helping connect us to the world around us and what it's like to kind of take those symbols or that aesthetic or whatever main theme is and then put it into our bodies in the way that we move.
Oh, this is such a good question. Um, hmm. So that's like a funny little tightrope too for me because yoga, we can have a long conversation of it being like an appropriated form of movement. And it's one of those things you don't want to like reinvent it or disrespect any history or lineage within the practice by like renaming things in like a fun way. So that's something I'm always just trying to, that's in my consciousness a lot.
Mhm.
Um, but there's also this like playful and like light attitude that comes through in a lot of the yoga conversations. And when I develop the theme and the focus for the class, I'm a very visual person, and I'll just sort of like look at I'll literally like pull up Google Images for different things that I'm talking about. Like even now, I'm like looking off into like
Yeah.
imaginary space. And I just sort of like try to make connections with like how could I make that same shape in um, your body,
Yeah.
and I try to always like convey them as like this is a variation of this existing pose, or I always try to like give the existing pose name or the pose from whatever. Be like, but today we're going to call it this because our intention is that we're moving with this season or with this theme.
Mhm.
Um, Something that sort of like inspired that was just doing yoga with my child, um, and how like fun it was for her and me to be like, oh, this is called like turtle because we're talking about like marine life today.
Mhm.
Or like, I don't know, you've seen like Cosmic Kids Yoga, like she's doing great work.
Mm.
Um, and that I think strikes this chord with our like inner child, and that we're trying to move our bodies in a way that feels good and intentional and sweet. And I think like yoga can get very like serious, and the
Yeah.
pursuits around yoga gets very serious, and that's really important. But also, if we're moving and we're talking about Scorpio energy, let's make like a little scorpion tail.
Uh-huh.
Like I just find that to be it just adds to the intention of the practice. Like if you're going to
Yeah.
move your body intentionally, then maybe I get like a little literal about it, but sometimes that's that's part of the fun. I don't know. Just like, yes, this is like literally something we just talked about. This shape sort of resembles that, and like weaving everything together in like a pace and vibe that also reflects the theme. No, it just sort of like comes together. That's like how I don't know. It's like how I love to teach.
Yeah, I love talking about the playful aspect because I think that is a huge part of yoga, and also just the intention behind like a movement practice in general. Like why are we showing up to do this, practice? Whether, with yoga there's so many different reasons, but sometimes it's like we want to move and we want to like get a like flexibility or some strength or cardio. Like there's so many different reasons that kind of all culminate. And I also think one of the purposes and the intentions is this embodiment, and that can be very playful. It can be very serious, and then it can be very playful. And I think one of the things with being a little bit more free with that is it can help with taking down some of the like perfectionism that we can get into with things that we're wanting to practice, or like I don't know, anybody that's gone to a yoga class, usually the teacher at some point will be like, and do what you need to do, like if you don't have to align exactly with what we're doing. But sometimes you're in that flow, everybody's doing it, it's kind of hard to take that like permission and like have a little bit more exploration with it. But
Totally.
when you're you know kind of mixing it up, or mentally setting a different intention or a different vibe and doing the Scorpio tail or things like that, I think there already is this infusing of like, this isn't so, it doesn't have to be so serious. It doesn't have to be so like on point, perfect. And
Right.
there is more room to explore and to like really flow with what is happening for you in that moment, which I think is one of the things that I really like and really wanted to have this conversation for is like, what happens when we really start to tap into how we feel during the winter, for example, versus during the summer? You know, what kind of energy are we bringing to that? Yeah, sometimes during the summer, it's like bright and sunny in my room where I'm doing my yoga and I'm like, I want to stretch my arms up and make these big poses and I'm feeling super bright. And other times, in other seasons or just phases of our own life, it doesn't feel that same way. And so, how can our practice kind of reflect that? I think is so interesting.
This is another thing that's like funny that has like evolved. My understanding of this has evolved over time, which is just so great. Like I've been, teaching for over 10 years and like practice with a lot of teachers that have a lot of different styles and have pulled themes like this into their classes, like here and there. And they'll often offer like, oh, these are the energies that are associated with a full moon or with the fall or what have you. And it's so interesting to observe that and learn that. But then it ultimately, then you start to feel, I feel like after a while, as you become more like informed and sensitive to these kinds of energies or themes, that like, I don't always feel that way,
Mhm.
or something will happen, be like, I know everyone's like this, that, and the other
Mhm.
during a full moon. They feel so crazy, they can't sleep. But like I find that I feel very relaxed or like meditative or so. And then so that, I think that's the key part of the practice, and that I'm trying to convey with the practice. Like you'll never hear me say like, and during this time you're going to feel this,
Mhm.
or everybody says that. But like these are the themes associated with this season. And the more you understand those themes as maybe associated with a season,
Mhm.
then you start to sort of give yourself a vocabulary to understand your inner seasons, or how maybe you feel during a season like fall.
Mhm.
I'm having my own personal fall, even though it's summer. I'm having a bit of a shed moment
Mhm.
myself. I feel like this happens every time the summer comes. Like this is the energy outside, this is the energy inside. And looking, I feel like, and just with any kind of practice or understanding, you find yourself like in a bit of a like, I'm harmonizing these two energies.
Yeah.
And especially now these days, like everything is polarized, everything's politicized, everything's like us, them, this. It's like there's this like coexisting challenge between you and nature, where
Mm.
you're part of nature but not always in perfect alignment. There's like other stuff happening in your life or in your world or in your you know brain chemistry. So part of my, I guess, intention for the channel is to sort of, without shoving it down people's throats, just like giving you kind of a vocabulary, offering these seasons up and their lessons, because then you sort of digest them and then they resonate with you as they're relevant with you,
Yeah.
and that unfolds at different times for different people, different stages of life, different seasons of life. So I guess it's like understanding the seasons of the year is just like giving yourself a better understanding of the seasons that happen with you, that unfold in different time frames.
That is
So
so brilliant. I love like that perspective on holding that duality, which is always true. It always comes back to that. Is like, how do we have better language and better skills and understanding around knowing something is kind of maybe collectively going on and then maybe it's really differing from what's personally
totally,
going on, and then yeah, you can extrapolate that out into our tolerance for others and into our ability to take in complex ideas and like then see how they sit inside of us. I mean, that's such a like life practice. And I really love
totally.
the layering, because that's one thing I was wondering about is like, what happens when we start to layer our understanding of these things? Like if we look at the season and then the astrological season and then the moon phase at any given time, all three of those things are happening. And sometimes they are really aligned and it makes sense. And then other times, I'm sure, even just within nature, those layers are all kind of bringing something different. So, how do you find, working with the layers?
Yeah, so I think again, like just the evolution of the understanding over time. Um, Sometimes people really vibe with astrology, sometimes they don't. Fine. Also, in my personal experience with astrology, sometimes it really hits, sometimes it doesn't. Interesting. Just like got to be open minded about it. But what I've learned is that there's so many influencing energies and factors with everyone's like personal, let's say your birth chart, we can't really reduce someone to their sun sign,
Mm-hmm.
especially how astrology itself as a science and practice has evolved over time. Sometimes we associate ourselves with our rising signs, and like that has kind of shifted over time, and however many hundreds slash thousands of years we've been practicing this, and how the cosmos themselves have shifted during that time. So for me, I find that there's always this like wisdom in each of the signs. Sometimes that really resonates with the season of that astrological sign. You can see like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
like overlapping themes or energies, and I think that that's really interesting. But what I'll do is sort of like study the sign itself, what a station of the zodiac or whatever, and kind of dive into the mythology and the storytelling around it, the symbolism of it. And that's where I find it's like the most resonant for
Mm-hmm.
myself and for others, I guess. Because instead of saying like, oh, if you know a Scorpio, then they're this, that, and the other. It's more like Scorpio represents these
Mm-hmm.
themes. And the story of Scorpio goes like this, and the lesson of that story is this, and that's kind of why it's resonant with the sign the way that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find that is way more impactful, and there's like so much more like truth in that, because then it becomes less about your personality and who you're, what another box to like fit yourself or the people that you know into,
Yeah.
and it becomes more of a like like that's an interesting question. Do you think that you yourself like could work on something like that? Is like I don't know. I just like I love asking questions or
Mm-hmm.
like exploring these themes um, and presenting them in that way. That just feels to me. That just feels better to me.
Yeah,
That's
because we all have like our birth chart, and that can get so complicated, and it can never be boiled down to one thing. And then we also all exist within the wheel of the year. We're all always moving through. And then if you really, go further into astrology, what the astrology of the year, whatever 2024 is versus 2025, like, and we're all getting impacted by those things. So it would be impossible to boil it down to such a simplistic category or box or label. And I agree with you. I think it's a lot more powerful just taking the symbols, and as we learn to recognize how these things feel inside of us, then you can like start to have a little bit more understanding or like knowledge at your back when you're going through something. If you're going through a certain phase, and then you really do want to turn and look at like, okay, what actually is happening astrologically, or what's happening with the moon right now? Like, does this help, not even, I mean, validate in a way, or does this help give me some solace, or does this help me understand deeper what's happening for me? Does it make me feel less alone because other people are moving through something similar at this time? Using it as like, same as what you're saying, asking questions, going deeper, and also feeling that like common humanity piece, which is like going all the way back to when you're talking about poetry, that like these things are so universal. There's something within the energy of every astrological sign that probably resonates with every single one of us, you
Exactly.
know?
That's like,
And
it's like that's exactly what I'm saying, and there's this call, like you're kind of saying it creates this place, which I think is what yoga does as well. It creates this place of inquiry and like non-judgment, right? Like we're being curious about our body. It's not like, oh, I can't do that, I'm failing, I should look like this and I don't look like this. Like eventually, or at least where I come from with yoga, or at least how I'm presenting yoga, at least I know this isn't always like everyone's intention, is that you look at your body more with like curiosity, and it's really just it's so much of a journey of like getting to know yourself better. And in they always say like the truth will set you free, and whenever we go to therapy we have these like honest conversations, and I think that's what it's about, like kind of just like being honest and accepting,
mhm.
so much acceptance, and then you can really
Mhm.
like use that acceptance as a fertile ground to cultivate other things in your life. Oh, you were saying that like, oh, how does the moon in its current sign affecting me, or how does this, and I think that that's what's so interesting is that hopefully the classes or the information I'm presenting kind of like sets everyone off on their own like
Mhm.
inquiring explorations,
Mhm.
like whether that you're like, oh, I want to kind of learn more about astrology and my personal birth chart and how that is maybe shaping me or my life. Or maybe someone's like, oh, I want to learn more about like storytelling and how like storytelling feels like so healing to me, and how it like resonates with me and my family and my community and culture.
Mhm.
Or maybe it's more like I want to do more yoga, and like how yoga, I feel like I'm unlocking something or feeling a certain way, and like maybe you just go down deeper into the yoga pursuit or meditation or into poetry. I don't know, I just feel like there's so many directions that you could take it, but it's kind of all rooted in knowing ourselves better in a way that is so like that is gentle and kind, and
Mhm.
more in a place comes from curiosity than trying to label things or fit into a mold or something.
Yeah, or needing to, like, fix things too, because that's,
That's kind of what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to find the right words to say that this is like an anti-shame practice.
Yeah.
You find all these because we really as a society like want to commit to these like shame-based lifestyles or shame-based ways of thinking. I mean, that's big business in like making someone feel like there's something wrong with them. And I just feel like it's kind of that cultivating a better understanding of yourself
Mm.
and your community and your world in a way that's like really open-minded and just comes from a place of curiosity is just better.
And it kinda happens without you even noticing sometimes, like, with these movement practices and with yoga, like, it can kind of sneak in this way of just kind of mindfully attending to the breath, and then as you practice more and you certain poses are really hard and then they start to be less hard, and it's just this very gentle step by step kind of thing. And I do feel like that's very valuable because I will say, like, my field being in therapy, in the counseling world, in no way is it shame based, or should it be, in the right, with the right therapist, and that it should never be like that. But there is something, I think, to psychology in general and how much the conversation has now turned to all of these labels and the things we need to
Mm.
work on and your inner child healing and stuff that's very important. But it can start to feel really overwhelming. And I can even feel kind of like, oh my God, there's so much I need to fix about myself. There's so much I need to heal. Like, I'm kind of so screwed up. It can start to feel that way when you're focusing on it solely from that lens. And sometimes, like, really stepping back and seeing that healing can also happen through movement and through playfulness and fun and lightheartedness and, you know, ease and rest. Like, it happens in all of those places too. And it doesn't have to be so kind of like tough, or, those deep,
Yes. This is a
honest
big part of the
conversations. Yeah.
this is a big part of at least my intention as well. It's like and we always talk about this in yoga, the concept of non-attachment.
Mhm.
And I feel, and this is like another interesting dance. I'm working on myself, but without the expectation of a certain result at a certain time. I
Mhm.
think that's yoga in and of itself. We might have goals, or I want to hit this, whatever. But the overarching journey of the practice is it's a practice. Like, you just practice. There's no real goal. You might have personal goals, but the overall practice is not structured as such.
Mhm.
I mean, at its deepest level, it's not.
Yeah.
Like, you might go to a yoga class, it's like, oh, this is beginner, intermediate, but what they're structuring that in terms of like, how challenging is the class.
Mhm.
So we can get wrapped up in that, oh, I need to be better, I need to get better. Like, that's our societal
Mhm.
narrative, like, creeping in. And it really does echo, especially in therapy, or especially in any like personal journey or whatever. It's like interesting to have goals. It's interesting to set intentions, to feel like beholden to things that you want to cultivate in your life, but also to detach from expectations in a way that you're going to be like putting pressure on yourself to be different at a certain time. I feel
Mhm.
like that's like maybe the hardest part of all, and something I try to just cultivate in the practice all the time. Because I know I have a lot of people that practice with me that are like, first of all, I'm not in the room with people. And so it's hard to like see how different bodies are moving and keeping everybody safe. I know people of all ages are practicing, people with injuries are practicing. So I do try to like offer so many options,
Mm.
just because, you could do this yesterday, maybe you can't today. I don't know. I just try to like take all the pressure off of it,
Yeah.
because it really isn't about being in a certain shape at a certain time necessarily. Um, I don't know, at the end of the day. So it's interesting you said that, because we always feel like I need to heal myself. I'm
Mhm.
healing myself. But then at a certain point, I don't know, the acceptance creeps in, and it's not so much that you're like giving up, but you kind of, I don't know, it takes like the pressure off of the journey of healing. Maybe you won't get it all done in this lifetime, girl.
Yeah.
Like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot to get done in like one lifetime.
Yeah, there really is like
It's so much.
an easing up of that, and acceptance is, I feel like the further you go down these journeys, like the more it does kind of circle back to the most foundational, simple stuff. And something I am really interested, since you are moon medicine yoga,
Mm,
I would really like to talk a little bit too about like the cyclical nature kind of that happens in a month or in different time spans, and the moon is like a really big way that we tune into that. Like, it's moving through its phases, and it's going to keep doing that over and over, and there's something really um I don't know, powerful about that. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit about that cyclical nature and how we can use that in our own daily practice, yoga practice, however you kind of want to answer it. But
yeah.
um yeah.
So again, another like multifaceted question.
Mhm.
Again, it's one of those things where I would say, like, long ago, when we were really like, our connection to nature was everything. Like, when we were more like of an agricultural society, or just living truly beholden to certain cycles like the moon and the seasons.
Mhm.
I feel like they had way more of an influence on our life, than maybe they do now, just from a practical standpoint. Like the harvest moon. Oh, it rose earlier in the night, and it was brighter. So we're like gathering crops more. This is, so like, there's certain themes that maybe aren't like specifically relevant, but, thematically or symbolically relevant.
Mhm.
So that's a sort of like where sometimes people really reduce it. Like, we should be this. I'm like, well, we have air conditioning, we have
Mhm.
plumbing, like things are different Now it's not, they're not irrelevant. It's just you need the influence, the practicality of that is just different for a lot of people living in like a modern society. So from like the month or the transition of the moon through the month and things like that, again, I think it's like another mirror to understand yourself. But the moon is such like a huge influence of energy. You know, she like pulls on the tides. There's gravitational pulls, and like you can't ignore the fact that this energetic cycle is happening around this planet that we're living on.
Mm.
So I think it's really cool to tap into the moon's phases as a source of structure.
Mm.
So there's this, especially for women, the moon's on a 28-day cycle. So our most women, or like people born female, or people that are having a female experience, they're on like a 28-day cycle. If you're,
Mhm.
you know, that's just like the menstruation cycle of 28 days. I think that's really interesting. Um, so if you're connected with the moon or using it as a way to move through your life, there's always the new moon, which is a place to, in nature, like cultivate a bit of stillness. It's dark. So maybe without the illumination of light, like it's almost a call to like, okay, let's slow down. The path isn't quite clear, or this is a moment to maybe reflect on the steps you want to take when the light starts like coming back. You know, there's like a seed planting,
Mhm.
going into the ground kind of a theme, a reset kind of a theme, a rest theme. It is so dark, like, hey, you know, the lights are out, you might as well close your eyes. You know, I just feel like, like people get so deep with this. I'm like, we're just dark, and maybe you're just want to like kick your feet up for like a minute, you know, like
Yeah.
just enjoy it for a second. And then as the moon starts to wax, we start feeling this like maybe this building energy, this more like kinetic quality to the moon, or the way it we could perceive that as humans. Again, the moon isn't really like telling us anything. It's all about us and our brains and how human brains like process patterns. And I feel like if we're seeing this like growing energy, or this like growth um, kind of pattern, that, you know, that sort of that could be a beautiful like build on the previous cycle. So if we've
Mhm.
planted things and taken a second to think through some things, then maybe we feel more grounded in that place, and then we feel like, okay, I know what I'm doing. You can sort of start taking some action and like kind of flowing with that like kinetic energy. Then we get to like the half moon, the first quarter, which is, well, I personally think it's like it's so clean. You know, it's like
Mhm.
a little half guy,
Mhm.
and it's just like it's just like a checkpoint. You know, it's very it's discernible. It's like almost crazy how perfectly
Yeah.
semicircle it is. Um, and I feel like that's a really good checkpoint for that's how I receive it, at least. Okay, all I've taken this action. Is this still like in alignment? Is this making sense? You can like reassess your goals, or even take a second to start like fine tuning. This is working, this isn't working. I'm going to start following this path and like giving this more energy. So we're like growing to this like fullness, obviously. So then we get through the wax and give us same kind of thing. We're following that kind of like growing aspect,
Mhm.
and maybe reaching a point where we might feel, or we're getting a message of like fruition. Okay, so what's like coming into its fullness now? Okay, you had this goal. There's a good reflection. Maybe ask, what's like come to fruition? And I feel like this so often is like a little warped, in my opinion. Some of these like messages that we hear, like for me, it's a matter of like recognizing your wins and like really observing what you have brought to fruition. And maybe it
Yeah.
was just, oh, I tried this and I'm like learning a lesson here, or this didn't work, but like I feel like that's probably good, or this didn't work and I'm kind of mourning that. Like fruition can be seen through like a lot of different lenses. You know, I always
Mhm.
think like, what did you accomplish? Again, we have to be careful with like how some of our societal like
Mhm.
things get in. It's like, what did you accomplish? Did you learn something? That's great.
Mhm.
Human person, that is great. Like, now let's start to like absorb that message, and then we start getting into like the waning phases.
Yep.
And this can be, this resonates different with different folks. Again, so we've like had this checkpoint with the full moon, like taking stock of maybe what we've brought to fruition. And then there's this like shedding phase of the moon when she
Mhm.
starts to get skinnier and skinnier towards her crescent. So this could be inferred as a, like I said, a shedding season where maybe now you know what to focus on and you can start to kind of declutter and like remove things that maybe aren't necessary. Um, or maybe it's like you're, again, maybe your fruition under that full moon was more one of like lesson learning, or like, okay, now I have to start like letting this thing that happened to me, like I'm processing it and
Mhm.
letting it be, letting the time of the waning cycle be a time for me to process something, or like to maybe let that pain like kind of sit with that, and like it's slowly gonna maybe just over time change for me. um so that's, again, I feel like we reduce these down to such simple things, but I feel like if you remember that the moon is just like a celestial thing, it really doesn't have the same kind of expectations of us that maybe
Mhm.
we put on ourselves. I think once you like start to think of it that way, it's like just another pattern noticing,
Mhm.
that then you can start to then I think that just that's really freeing. Like, what can I intuitively infer from this thing that happens in this kind of cycle that looks like this, feels like this,
Mhm.
which ultimately then the crescent starts to, I mean, energetically, maybe it's like waning in energy. Maybe you don't feel that way.
Mm.
But it's taking us back to the beginning.
Mhm.
And like that is just so yoga. Like every time we take a new breath, it's like we're beginning again. Anytime we come to the mat, we're beginning again. Every day we wake up, we're beginning again. It's this like freeing, and I can start over again if I want to. Like whatever. Like that's for me the biggest message. It's like whatever, just start over. Do something different. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Or maybe now you're at a new reset point where you build on the goals from the previous cycle, and you're like, okay, now this is a new beginning, building off of that,
Mhm.
and I'm going to take it again, because I feel like it's always, oh, what could you start? What are your intentions? Like, we're starting over. Maybe people aren't starting over. Now they're just
Mhm.
like starting a new phase of something that they're the new phase of a journey that they're already in.
Yeah.
So that for me is just at its most basic level what it's like to notice and observe the moon. You might get called to understand the moon's position in astrology, and that like shapes your experience and your goal setting. You might start to appreciate the moon where it is in the seasons, and that's sort of shaping your intention. Or maybe it's where it is with your fertility journey or your personal journey in some other way.
Yep.
So that's where for me it's become a tool, just to give me a little bit of, I'm a Virgo, so it's like, where can I find more structure, baby? So that's,
Oh, yeah.
for me, like how you could, move with the moon in your own way, without having it be so like textbook.
It's so powerful. Like, I love the way that you laid it out. It's very intuitive. I mean, you would hope because, yeah, at one point, like the sun and the moon was kind of all we had to go off of for a really, really long time before like the construct of time was created. That was still happening
Right.
at regular intervals, which is so crazy. And I think something that really struck me when you're talking about it too is imagining that the waning is as long, is equal in length to the waxing, the growing, the building. And then if, I think of like waning and that, linking it to the menstrual cycle too, like that phase of kind of slowing down, getting ready to shed, more energy is going inward. Um, that rest period, which is the part that societally we don't focus on and we definitely don't believe is equal in strength and importance to the building and the doing and the completion and all of that. Basically, society is valuing like the half moon and up to full moon, and
Your
just
productive times. Yep,
that's
totally.
the part we want to live in. That's a quarter of the experience. And I just think that having something that's so powerful and so just like bigger than us, like the cosmos and the moon and stuff, like the moon has been there, the moon will be there past us, same way that the earth will be. And so they're these big energies that are just doing what they do. And the fact that built into those energies is this permission to slow down, the time to shed, the time to go inward, the time to just integrate and digest. That is built in equal proportion is, I think, really freeing and very um, beneficial to any of us. This is definitely a part of my experience that are really trying to learn how to do that practice and not just fall into this expectation that we always have to be showing up in one way that is can be very
Totally.
draining and very
Totally.
unrealistic.
And I love talking about the way, over time and in history, different things were relevant for different reasons and different symbolic practices. Because even though maybe your community isn't setting a huge wheel on fire and turning it and then rolling it down a hill into a lake, like maybe your culture doesn't do that. I get it. But maybe there's still something like why did they do that? Like
Mhm, mhm,
it was probably so relevant and so important
mhm,
that I'm sure it resonates in some way with you or your
mhm,
culture. I think that's also kind of what's interesting is that I will pull or get inspiration from all kinds of cultures, and not in a way that's um, I feel like a way that's like just educational. Like,
mhm.
isn't this interesting? Like they had the same practice and they had the same
Yep.
practice, or isn't it interesting that they had this practice at this time of year and the intention was this? Like, doesn't that resonate with how maybe you feel around this time of year? I just think that's kind of, it's just, again, like you said before, there's this like individual um, inquiry that then like echoes out into like humanity and echoes out into our communities, and they're sort of the same but they're also different. We're
Mhm.
like having individual experiences in this like unifying experience. It's just funny.
It's so wonderful. I've absolutely loved what this conversation has become. I think it's very resonant, and I I feel like hopefully listeners kind of can walk away from today too thinking about their own relationship to the things that we've talked about. Like, yes, is fall more about shedding, and spring is new ideas and the moon cycles. Yeah, there are these common things, but what does that look like? And even just personally, like thinking about where each of us is at right now in our lives and what that maybe calls for, what we need more of, which might look like the things that we were doing last week. And that's
Totally. And
so
not everyone's
natural.
experiencing the seasons in the same way.
Mhm.
I'm very much, and I don't disclose this enough on the channel. Like I am speaking from a perspective that is from the East Coast of the United States at a certain latitude
Yeah.
that kind of has in its own maybe even colonial way like projected out onto everyone else's
Uh-huh.
experience, because I have people joining me from like the Southwest and they're like, we don't really have this season. We don't have like maple trees and this blah blah blah. Like we have the same kind of landscape that changes in different ways as the year goes on. So again, it's one of those things like presenting themes
Mhm.
to like explore and learn from, because I know that my experience is going to be so much different from someone that's even living like a few states away in this country, in this hemisphere. But yeah, I would say that it should be just what I'm presenting are like themes, symbols, tools to understand yourself and your world a little bit better, to reconnect you to nature and those natural cycles, which affect us in one way or another.
Yep.
And um, that hopefully it opens up just some like doors and windows of more exploration and like more tools and more things that are just fun
Mm-hmm.
to dive into, and like ways to understand yourself a little bit better, I guess. Making it a little easier for us here.
I love that. I love it. Where can people find you?
I'm on YouTube, Moon Medicine Yoga,
Mm-hmm.
and I am taking a tiny break at the moment. Again, I'm like kind of honoring a little bit of like a rest season.
Mm-hmm.
So if you find my channel on YouTube, Moon Medicine Yoga, it is organized. So you can scroll down and there's a whole playlist of full moon classes. There should be like 2 or more years of full moon classes, new moon classes, classes that I have published for the seasons. And if you
Mm-hmm.
are a person that follows like the cross quarter festivals like Samhain and Candlemas and Beltana, Imbolc, and things like that. So the midpoints between each of the main seasons, those are also there for you.
Mm-hmm.
There are some restorative classes. So if you're like observing like a period of rest, um, they're there for you as well. There's also I'm like publishing some like poetry readings right now, which is
Mm-hmm.
fun. And the membership situation. So I am sort of like pulling back. So I don't want people to like join as members thinking they're going to get like new content in the interim right now. But if you wanted to access a series of classes that does mirror the energy of the phases of the moon, again from like a generic standpoint, that's there for you as well. It's called the Moving with the Moon series. And there's also some 60-minute vinyasa classes that are available there if you want to join as a member and like get behind that paywall. So
It's really wonderful, very beautiful. There's imagery, and it's a really lovely way to honor each of these seasons or whatever it is
thank you.
that we're honoring. And I'm so grateful that I got to have you. This was a wonderful conversation. And as you said, the community is like the part that really I feel like just makes all of this stuff so amazing and special. So anybody that has any thoughts or things they want to share after listening, please reach out. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok, the Evergreen RX. And also, if anybody wants to go and follow you, then please do that. Subscribe to her channel, follow on
Yeah,
Instagram, and you can always keep up the conversation with either of us if that's good with you.
totally. Yeah, I always say I'm like way too accessible sometimes. Um, which is cool. I'm like, oh my God, reach out on Instagram. Or like here's like a list of ways to do that. But yeah, I'm at Moon Medicine Yoga everywhere.
Thank you so much. It was so wonderful to have you. And thank you guys for listening. And I'll catch you guys in the next one. All right. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.